Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, our Locked On Podcast Network's NFL Power Rankings are out. I want to take a look at where the Eagles are and kind of talk about where they are compared to some of the other top teams like the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot of that has to do with quarterback and Jalen Hurts. We'll get into all that and more right here on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcoming Eagles fans to a Tuesday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase. He's Gino Camilleri. You can find our podcast Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms, on YouTube as well. And make sure you hit us up on Twitter at LockedOnBirds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. The Eagles take on the Pittsburgh Steelers this Sunday at 1 o'clock. Kenny Pickett and the 2-win Pittsburgh Steelers, a very different Steelers team than you're used to seeing in Philadelphia. Every 8 years and every 4 years they take each other on. And Gino, the Eagles coming off the bye week right now, 6-0. And, you know, we've for weeks now have talked about every angle that you can hit on as to why this team is having so much success. Their first 6-0 start in over a decade, in actually 18 years, right? Or 18 years since 2004. And we've hit again on everything. But one of the obvious elements that we talked about in the summer because of training camp and how they were using their players, how they were, utilizing these practices, but we haven't really hit on it in the regular season, is just how healthy the Eagles are this year. According to Fox's bus ratings, or it's the banged up score, the Eagles remain the number one team in terms of total roster health, especially when it comes to the impactful starters. And that is so massive. Like, they have the depth to overcome if they need to, like the 2017 Eagles did, 2018 and 2019. But the fact that you don't have to deal with that, that is why we're seeing this team at their fullest potential. And it used to be so frustrating back in the day because we'd be like, why aren't the 2018 Eagles so consistent? And there was a lot of reasons, but they just could never be healthy. And this team is at full strength.
You can either go both ways with it in terms of how you overcome adversity or how you succumb to adversity. And I look at a team like Buffalo. If you look at their past couple seasons, they've been relatively healthy. Going into this offseason, they don't have their number one cornerback in Tre'Davious White. They ended up playing a game a couple weeks ago where they're down to their fifth, sixth corner on the roster, and they're still performing at a high level. That's a team that overcame adversity and is still performing due to the players that they have on the roster. The Philadelphia Eagles, under the same motive, did relatively similar. They're 6-0. They weren't healthy the last couple of the games. They were out 60% of their offensive line at one point during that game. They're down their slot corner, which is arguably a top three most important position on defense. But going back a couple of years, these injuries that they have had the last couple of weeks, this is minor compared to what they had. The Super Bowl, you lose Jason Peters, you lose Darren Sproles, you go up and down the list of everybody.
Jordan Hicks, Carson Wentz,
Jordan Hicks,
Chris Maragos.
By the end of the year, you're down 5 or 6 starters, which goes to show that you have to have depth in this league. But it also has a lot to do with the performance and the rehabilitation staff that they have brought over from the Rams and how improved that they have been in that department. Because there was one year, Lou, I don't remember if it was last year of Chip or maybe the first year of Doug, where it seemed they had 12 to 15 guys with hamstring injuries throughout that year. And we're saying, how are they getting these soft tissue injuries? And they're big time players getting these injuries. Well, now everybody seems to be doing good besides pre-existing injuries that they have suffered in the past just coming up again. For the most part, fingers crossed, they have all those players that they need, according to Fox. Like you said, they're doing pretty good in the banged up department.
Well, and as you mentioned, there's a new staff here when it comes to the medical personnel, and that's a huge part. They're also a lot younger in their roster when it comes to the starting lineup compared to those 4 years. At the same time, though, Gino, I think a lot of it, too, is just luck, because it didn't matter from 2017 to 2020 how old were you, what position you were. everybody got hurt. And I'd never
Yes.
seen anything like it for that long of a stretch. For 1 year, you could see it. Like the Baltimore Ravens last year had that kind of situation where everybody was hurt, but it's not a year in and year out thing. For the Eagles, it was for years and years straight. It was for 4 seasons in a row. And the fact that you don't have to deal with that. Yeah, again, it's great to know your team can overcome that adversity back then to make the playoffs and even win a Super Bowl, nearly get back the following year, win a division the year later. You know, this Eagles team has that in them too, with their depth and with their battle-tested personnel, both young and old. But the fact that you don't have to deal with that, again, you just have to play so much more conservative. You have to play perfectly mistake-free football. And not that you want to make mistakes now, but you just couldn't afford any setbacks when you're in a situation like that. And having this consistent of health is such a huge difference in talking about expectations. We're not just like, oh, it would just be so cool to see this kind of team make the playoffs. You can't really think championship consistently when you're in that kind of situation. And so to have the Eagles number one, not just way better than they used to be, it's crazy the turnaround. They were back in the day 32nd in this department. And now they are literally number one in this rating that Fox does every week.
And you can continue on the names that they had lost in the last couple of years before this. I mean, Timmy Jernigan was out for a bit. Malik Jackson was nearly out for a whole season that 1 year that they signed him, brought him in. He's done week 1. They now have players that, one, can play and are available. That's Howie Roseman, one of the 3 things he wrote down before, I believe, the 2020 draft. Can they run? Can they be healthy? And do they love football? Well, being healthy is number one. You look at Devontae Smith, who played in the SEC. He might be an undersized player, but for the most part, he held up through every one of those games. Yeah, he suffers that knee injury towards the end of his career, but for the most part, he held up. Jordan Davis, same type of thing. You're bringing in guys who have a track record of remaining healthy. So let's continue to do that. Bring in guys who are battle-tested and aren't just playing with rubber bands for.
And you have the right approach too. I mean,
they're doing
you
it
didn't
great.
Force them all training camp, and that's the thing is maybe you're a little rusty in certain departments in certain areas that way, but you'll always take that approach and coming in not limping out of the.
It's always better to be cautious in that regard.
Right.
It's a 17-game season unless you go to the playoffs where it could be up to 20. Like you said, Lou, especially the first couple of weeks in the NFL. I mean, even now through week 7, what do we really know? Maybe not much outside of the top and the bottom, but those first couple weeks, anything is possible. So if you can remain healthy out of the gate, you'll work through those woes. The tackling is starting to come around. The turnovers are starting to come into play.
Yeah.
The offensive line, now that they're going to be healthy off of this bye week, should be better. And I think a lot of it has to do with Nick Sirianni's approach, which is a collaborative effort between everybody, the owner, the general manager, the strength conditioning staff. How are we going to play this? How are we going to script out our offseason so that by the end of the race, we're not all banged up? Going back to the Formula One car, yeah, it would be great to get off the line and pick up 5-6 spots. But on corner 12, if you crash on lap 1, it really doesn't matter. You want to be there in lap 50, 60 by the end of the race where you have a chance to cross the finish line.
Yeah.
And hey, if you have to limp into the playoffs with some late season injuries, that happens. You've overcome.
Oh, yeah. You're not going to be perfectly healthy the entire season. But
no,
again,
it's impossible.
It's a huge difference from years ago when everybody was hurt. There were the majority of games you were out 70% of your starting lineup at best.
Do you remember the Brent Selleck game where he almost had to come in on the offensive line because they got hurt so badly?
There's been some, I mean, we know about 2018 and 2019 and Gino, quarterback especially. I mean, we know outside of last year with Jalen Hurts, every one of those playoff runs, you had different players at the most important position too. And I want to get into Jalen Hurts coming up next because not only is he healthy, but the Eagles are doing everything in their power to maximize Jalen in this year 3 breakout. And I started thinking about this watching that Bears-Patriots game yesterday. It got me thinking about Hurts and Justin Fields and just situations overall for quarterbacks in the NFL. So that's coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, life has thrown us all a lot of curveballs. We've always struggled with anxiety. You know, Gino and I both for years have been, getting help, and a lot of people out there Luckily, we had the courage to talk to someone, and thank God we did. It's so important to show up for yourself and take care of yourself. Letting others help is just as important, and that's where BetterHelp comes in. It's online therapy that will assess your needs. They can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. I've been seeing a therapist now for a couple years. It's really changed the way I think and just overall the way you go about crisis and stressful situations. I'll never recommend something more than BetterHelp to our listeners. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. You can schedule weekly video or phone sessions if you don't want to go in person. With therapy, it can take a few times to find the right fit for you as well. BetterHelp makes it easy and free to change therapists if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline therapy, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp is a great way to invest in yourself. Visit the website and read their testimonials that are posted daily. So many people have been using BetterHelp. They're recruiting additional therapists in all 50 states. They have a special offer to our Locked On Eagles listeners. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. Again, that's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. Guys, today's show is also sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Head over to LinkedIn.com, then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you like to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs /1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. I'm Louis DiBiase. He's Gino Camilleri. We thank you so much for making this Tuesday edition of Locked On Eagles your first listen, and we thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, make sure you check out our Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insight only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app you're listening, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Gino, I'm sure you caught a lot of that game last night. Monday Night Football, not great. Primetime football. They keep throwing us kind of junk, right? Dolphins, Steelers, Sunday night. We get Patriots, Bears. But I'll tell you what, it did make me appreciate what the Eagles have done for Jalen Hurts a whole lot more. Because Justin Fields actually had a really good game yesterday. The Bears finally moved him outside the pocket, these play action boots, more shotgun running to allow for that threat of Fields to run. A lot of what the Eagles have been doing with Jalen, but it took them like a year and a half into his career to finally start utilizing Fields in the right way. And he's had to elevate so much garbage with that Chicago offense. It really makes you appreciate what the Eagles have done for Jalen Hurts. Like, obviously a quarterback needs to elevate a team regardless of situation to be a franchise guy because situations are always going to be, ever changing. But man, what the Eagles have done for Jalen compared to a guy like Fields in Chicago, who I actually thought for a while was better than Hurts, night and day, it shows you what a situation can do for a player.
Outside of the offensive line, it reminds me a lot of that rookie team with Carson Wentz and the guys he's throwing to in the skill position players outside of Zach Ertz that he had to rely on. Guys like Wendell Smallwood and Dorial Green-Beckham. They didn't give him anything. And Howie Roseman realized this formula may not work. And they did it in a different fashion in 2017. They brought in a veteran Alshon Jeffrey, brought in a veteran Torrey Smith. Yeah. But we have seen this youth movement and how important skill position players are and how highly drafted they are going in the previous couple drafts. Look at all of the draft picks that have been traded for teams to go up and get high-quality wide receivers between Jameson, Williams. You could go down the list last year with Devontae Smith and the Eagles giving up a pick to go there. That is the trend, and how the Eagles are doing it should be appreciated by everybody. Because if you watch that game, not just with Justin Fields, but with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi as well. Yeah. Who is he really throwing to in New England? It's Devontae Parker and Jacoby Myers.
Tyquan Thornton. Yeah.
Tyquan Thornton. And you're saying, Jalen probably could make the best of that situation.
Right. I thought you saw that last year to a degree. I mean, you got Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert, but Jalen Reagor was taking up a lot of reps.
Why would you want to put a hole in your boat when you have a perfectly good boat? You want to add things onto that. And that's what the Eagles have been doing with Jalen Hurts. And now you're seeing that, hey, maybe a quarterback who might not be a finished product right away, we can improve that development arc by bringing in players around him, which can build him up, but at the same time, he builds everybody else up. And looking at Chicago, I hope the best for Justin Fields moving forward. But, man, they have a lot of work to do. And the thing is, I don't think the Eagles have ever gotten in that situation just based on trench play. They've been so good in the trenches that they've never, to my opinion, hindered the development of a quarterback because of what was around him.
Right. For weapons, it wasn't on purpose. It has happened. 2016, as you mentioned, 2019 and 2020, even last year in 2021, but it was never because of a lack of effort. I mean, Howie Roseman every year tried to surround Carson Wentz with weapons and Jalen Hurts as well. Chicago, it feels like, just didn't even try with the offensive line, with the wide receiving core. I mean, he's throwing to Equanimeous St. Brown and Dante Pettis. I mean, I love Darnell Mooney, but that's just not nearly close enough to an NFL supporting cast for a quarterback. And again, Justin Fields has elevated a lot of that in Chicago. And there are things that have been his own issues that he just hasn't been great at. His mechanics are still pretty wonky, and his accuracy has been bottom tier in the NFL this year. But it's hard to not see the upside of a Justin Fields coming out of Ohio State, and to see what he's been in Chicago outside of yesterday. Situations impact a young quarterback for sure. And
without it,
I mean, with the Eagles, with Jalen Hurts, I honestly, Gino, I wanted the Eagles to draft Justin Fields in 2021. I doubted Hurts had the same ceiling as Fields, but the Eagles have done such a good job of maximizing what Hurts can do that we've seen the best of Jalen. And I still think Fields has that ability in him, but in Chicago, I would love to see what he could do in an offense like the Eagles. It would probably be what Jalen's been doing. So situation's huge. It's not everything for a quarterback, but man, is it important to not be a team like Chicago.
And the NFL, to a big degree, is a copycat league. And we've seen this exact recipe work for young quarterbacks to help their development. Look at a huge part of Josh Allen's year 2 to 3 jump. We forget that Stephon Diggs, one of the best route running wide receivers in the National Football League, was traded there. So how do you help improve a quarterback, be more accurate, and put the ball into the receiver's hands? Get a guy who can get consistent.
That's what happened with Carson in 2016 to 2017. I mean, Gino, look
and now A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Scott.
And they're not going anywhere anytime soon, man.
No, and they're getting separation, and they're young, and they remain on the field. And Jalen Hurts is the beneficiary of having Howie Roseman go through those trials and tribulations of failure in the past. And that's where a young GM, it's great. Like Ryan Pace, things are moving in the next direction, but nobody has the experience outside of Belichick that Howie Roseman has. You can look at the Steve Kimes of the world, and they're still trying to figure it out. And Chris Ballard, you don't really know what he is. I would say Mickey Loomis is probably a close third, but after last year, who really knows? Howie Roseman, it's wins and lessons. It's either you win a Super Bowl or you learn the lessons that failed you getting back to the Mecca, and they're kind of moving in that department. And the Eagles, man, it's tough to look around the NFL, especially after this last week, and say there are many better offensive situations than the Philadelphia Eagles right now.
It's almost like some teams, when they have a mobile quarterback, they get complacent, right? Because those guys do an even better job of elevating talent. When structure breaks down, they can get outside the pocket. They can make things happen. Justin Fields, in the good games that he's had outside of yesterday, that's been mostly what's happened. You saw that a lot with Jalen Hurts last year. You saw that with a Carson Wentz. You see that with Lamar Jackson in the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, sometimes I just think teams get complacent. They say Lamar Jackson's going to make up for not having a Hollywood Brown. And, he's got Rashad Bateman, but not nearly enough in the wide receiver department. I don't know if that's part of it, but it does feel like sometimes that's a trend in the NFL, is when you have a mobile guy. I don't know. Maybe that's not true, but that's what I've noticed.
Is Mike Vick as good as he was in that return to Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Deshaun Jackson Jeremy Maclin and LaShawn McCoy aren't part of that trilogy.
No, probably not. And
Probably not.
what if you give those guys? What if you give Vic those guys in Atlanta to start his career? I mean,
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
He's
I
not
think it goes a
throwing
huge
to
way.
LG Crumpler as his number one.
Right, exactly. I'm really glad the Eagles recognize this and just have not stopped building around their quarterbacks and have not stopped trying, even in failures. Gino, it's kind of crazy. You look at, Justin Fields and all these different quarterbacks the Eagles either tried to replace Hurts with or we've considered for that spot, right? I mean, you look at Fields, Trey Lance's situation, Russell Wilson this year, Zach Wilson, even with the Jets at 5-2 has not been good. Carson Wentz. It's crazy that Hurts has been better than literally every quarterback that the team themselves considered over him or we did. It's a really cool story.
Jalen Hurts, keep him off the field and he will prove you wrong. He will find a way to come out there and win. He did it at Alabama when they tried to keep him down. He comes back, wins the SEC title game in replacement of Tua. And then you're saying, okay, they're going to take Tua. Well, he goes to Oklahoma, has just as good of a year as Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield did in those predecessor years. And now you're saying he's a top 7-8 guy in the league as we speak, maybe even a top 5 guy in the league, according to some people. And Lou and I, we will continue to say it. We will eat crow saying that we should have taken
every
these guys.
Quarterback I just mentioned, I wanted over him. I'm so glad to be wrong. I'm not gonna front.
We want to see the Eagles do well, and we want to be proven wrong in situations.
I was gonna say,
this.
people are probably, how many listeners are rolling their eyes remembering Lou talk up Trey Lance or
and especially the last thing I'll
Zach
say
Wilson
on this,
podcast.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on this is look at what they've had to give up for Jalen Hurts, which has allowed them to go and get more assets and get more skill position players because they only used the second. They didn't have to give up 2 firsts to go up and get Zach Wilson, to go up and get Justin Fields, to trade for Russell Wilson. And that's the optionality element that Howie Roseman always talked about. Right. And maybe not out of his first inclination, maybe out of a little bit of luck.
Definitely.
Howie Roseman
I'll take it, though.
ended out on the top of this.
You need luck in the
NFL.
NFL.
You really do.
Gino, I want to keep talking about Jalen Hurts coming up next, though, because the Locked On Podcast Network, our NFL Power Rankings came out, and where the Eagles are and who they're sandwiched in between kind of, falls into this conversation with Jalen. So we'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
Speaking of Jalen Hurts, this Sunday, if you want to get in on some daily fantasy action, where all you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players and say if they're going to go over or under their projected points. The way Jalen Hurts has been playing, going against the Pittsburgh Steelers team, which is 2-5, I for sure am taking the over.
Same.
Right now, I got some stuff going with some Champions League games going on right now. You can put in player selections on just about any game at all. Did you know you could put in player selections on disc golf, Lou, Euro basketball, cricket, women's college basketball, WNBA, NFL, NBA, MLB, and it's all through Prize Picks. Like I said, Prize Picks, all you do, you pick 2 to 5 players. If they're going to go above or below their projected points, you can win up to 10 times your money, and entries can be made in as little as 60 seconds. It's not a season-long thing where you have to put in claims on the bye week. You have to add players. No, it's just 1 week, 1 day even. You select the guys that you want between 2 to 5 players, or women if you're betting on WNBA as well. Put in your picks. It's operational in over 30 states and Canada. All you got to do is download the Prize Picks app today. Go to prizepicks.com to sign up for daily fantasy sports. They will give you a 100% deposit bonus match by using the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON. If you put in $100, they'll give you a nice crisp $100 to bet as well, and put in player selections. Go to prizepicks.com today. Use the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON. Get on the player selection action.
This is Locked On Eagles. I'm Louis DiBiase, and he's Gino Camilleri. It's a Tuesday edition of the show. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Gino, our Locked On NFL Power Rankings have come out, and the Eagles are sitting tight at number 2. They've been there now for 3 straight weeks. The Buffalo Bills are number 1, which, the Eagles are the only undefeated team. I understand it for sure. They are ahead of the Kansas City Chiefs, who were in at number 3 despite a massive performance from Patrick Mahomes and that Chiefs offense with Andy Reid just taking out maybe a top 3 defense in the NFL with the San Francisco 49ers, with
The best.
how they've played this year. Yeah, they statistically have been the best in the league, which is incredible. The Eagles are ahead of the Chiefs, right below the Bills. And I started to think about this with that whole Jalen Hurts conversation. I think a lot of it, because there is no denying the Eagles roster just as good as Buffalo and Kansas City's, if not better. It comes down to, let's say Jalen Hurts, you drop him into that situation that Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes found themselves in the playoffs last year, where for 4 quarters, every single drive to stay alive in that game, you needed your quarterback to make a play because the other guy was going to do it. Basically what it comes down to with the Eagles against those two teams, do you believe if you put Hurts in that situation, he can do just as good as those other quarterbacks on those teams? And I'm fascinated to know what he will do in that situation. We've had a lot of signs this year that he can now do it. But, when you think about it, we talked about the schedule yesterday. We're not going to really even find out how he can be in that kind of situation until the playoffs. And maybe not even then, considering how bad quarterback play has been in the NFC. But I am curious to know, because that is definitely a measuring stick compared to those top 2 teams with Buffalo and Kansas City.
So you're essentially saying if it's a Kansas City or Buffalo versus Eagles Super Bowl is the
right.
scenario
So
that
that's
we're
really
into.
the only. But hey, that's what we're thinking about right now, considering they're undefeated and nobody in the NFC is worth talking about. I mean, this is who you got to measure yourself against.
Well, if an Eagles and Bills Super Bowl does take place, I will lock myself in a bunker. That will be the worst case scenario for myself.
Same.
I have too much vested interest in that for it to be a good thing.
Same.
But getting back to said topic,
yeah.
I think it's not just a black and white answer. I think there are a lot of variables that go along with it. I would say, do you believe your quarterback can put you in that situation to make a play? 2, do you believe that the quarterback will take care of the football no matter the situation?
Right.
And 3, can your play caller and play designer script up an offense that can go toe-to-toe with those teams as well? I think all 3 of my answers currently, I would be silly to say no. I believe that all of them have what it takes to get it done, because Jalen Hurts, he's going to make a play regardless. The team wins because of Jalen Hurts. They're 6-0 because of Jalen Hurts at this point in time, seeing what he has done. He can throw. He's been able to throw the long ball. He's been able to protect the football, hitting those intermediate areas, putting it in the middle of the field, giving his wide receivers a chance to make a play. And probably the 4th caveat to that as well is, do you have the dogs, the horses to go race with those other teams? And the Eagles do. And I believe that they could do it.
I think, and again, we haven't seen that situation this year yet where there is a shootout against another star quarterback and you have to keep up. Mm-hmm. But, all signs, this time last year, I would have said absolutely not. But
no way.
Everything we've seen this year, the efficiency with more volume by Jalen, consistently efficient with 30-plus attempts. The Eagles are no stranger to putting up 30-plus points in a game consistently over the last 2 years. They're atop the league in explosive plays. Jalen Hurts this year has, I just saw the stat, he has the 3rd lowest percentage of bad throws. He has the 2nd lowest amount of turnover-worthy plays. We know that he can make plays with his legs as well. So all signs point to yes. I mean, again, we haven't seen it. So I put it to a poll, and still the majority say no. Maybe it's just because there's no evidence of it yet. And like you said, it's not black and white. The situation might be where your defense somehow limits Mahomes and Allen. You have the personnel. It's just, I get the conversation of you put him in that exact situation because those teams have that capability every week. At any point, they can go off like that. I do think they can do it. They have the horses, and Jalen's shown this year that all signs point to him being able to. I'm fascinated to see if we'll even get that test this year. I don't know if we will.
I believe we're under the same paradigm, you and I, of what we think of 2022. Until they prove us wrong,
right,
we can't doubt them. And that's kind of how 2021 was last year, where it was they've only beaten bad quarterbacks. So until they go and beat a good quarterback, we can't give you a definitive answer. And our whole thing last year was if they go into the playoffs and have to play one of these top tier teams, we kind of figure it was going to be the exact
and look what happened
result
against
of Tampa Bay.
Yes.
And this year I'm saying, I think they can go into any game against any opponent in the NFL and stand a chance to win that football game. Whether it's with offense, whether it's with your defense creating turnovers, stack a roster against a roster, stack performances against performances. The Eagles have beat everybody in their way right now. So until they prove me wrong, until they go on a stretch against Pittsburgh where maybe they win 20-17 and Houston, they're not really getting it rolling, and against Washington, they have a hiccup, then I'll start to question it. But as of right now, the performances they're putting out on offense, how they're able to control the football, come up big in situational moments, 4 minutes before the half, 4 minutes after the half, 2-minute drives to end the game. They're doing everything that those good football teams do as well. And they now have a quarterback that can even be in this conversation where last year, this wouldn't have even been a discussion. We never even would have gotten to this point.
It was literally a talking point of
the
a
evolution
show.
We want.
It was literally a talking point of a show I did in February talking about should they make a trade for another quarterback. Was this exact scenario. Drop Jalen Hurts into that game. Do you trust him? Last year, I would have said no 100% of the time. This year, I think he could do it. I think the signs point to yes. And again, we don't know if that situation will ever even come up this year, but if they're going to win a championship, the ultimate ceiling, and win a Super Bowl, you're probably going to have to play one of those two teams. And even if not them, you might have to play a Justin Herbert who has that capability, a Lamar Jackson who has that capability, a Joe Burrow who has that capability. So when we're talking about the ultimate prize this year, maybe it's not against the NFC. Maybe it has nothing to do with just getting through the conference playoffs. But when it comes to a championship, it's definitely a worthy conversation to have. So it'll be fascinating to see how it continues to progress. The Eagles take on the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. Not a horrible defense, so still a good test for Jalen Hurts. We'll take a first look at that matchup on tomorrow's edition of Locked On Eagles. Monday through Friday, we got a show for you on all podcast platforms, on YouTube as well. And we're always talking birds on Twitter. Make sure you hit us up at Locked On Birds, at DiBiase LOE, and at GC24_football. That'll do it, though, for today's show. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. Again, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your shows. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. Locked On Eagles, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.